The Runaway Wife. It is a tragic tale about the life of a fallen Muslim girl. This is also a love story of an Egyptian prostitute who fell in love with one of her clients, who changed her life for the better. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the author's prior written permission except by the reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs from the review for printing in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. All characters in this book are fictitious, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is pure coincidence. Chapter 16. I was a very naive Arab girl, a wayward Egyptian young woman, and a foolish Muslim wife. I didn't learn from my first mistake with the police officer. I left the hotel and went to the restaurant manager whom I had worked with before. I asked him to offer me the same job and help me find shelter. On this basis, I agreed to fulfill his sexual request. He was very happy when I yielded to his lustful, animalistic desire. He agreed to hire me again as a waitress and promised to provide me with temporary housing. He told me that he couldn't take me to his house because he lived with his mother and 2 sisters. He claimed that he was not married. He allowed me to sleep in the restaurant until he could find me shelter. When the restaurant closed at night, he would sleep with me before going home. I became a maidservant during the day and a sex slave at night. I worked for a week in that restaurant. Every night when the other workers left, the manager would spend time having sex with me without paying for inserting his cock into my pussy like a street prostitute usually does. He treated me like a slave or his right-hand possession Jaria who worked for him during the day and gave him her body at night. As the only female worker in that restaurant, my workload increased every day. All the male customers want to be served by no one but me. When the day was over, I fell asleep like a dead person. Sometimes I would fall asleep while the manager was fucking my numb body. I felt like a bird in a trap from which I could not do anything to free myself. One night, while I was sleeping alone in the restaurant, I was awakened by a hard shoe kick on my back. I woke up terrified and screaming. When I looked up, I saw an old man and a woman in her late 40s standing in front of me, like 2 demons. Their eyes showed indescribable anger. I was terrified when I thought they might be ghosts. My fear arose from the fact that the doors were securely closed from within, and then humans could walk in unless they were burglars broke in or kind of a satanic manifestation of a sort. "You dirty whore," the woman screamed. She continued, "This is a restaurant for eating and drinking, not a brothel for sex." I could not respond to her words. I couldn't figure out who they were and what they wanted from me. I was forced to my feet when the woman kicked me again. "Why did you kick me?" I wondered as I cried. The woman answered my question with a slap on my cheek. "Who are you two?" I asked them with a confused mind. The old man replied while his mouth was foaming like a raging camel, "We are the owners of this restaurant." From his long beard and the prayer beads in his right hand, I knew he was a deeply religious man. The old man continued, "You dirty whore, you have defiled our restaurant with your dirty, adulterous actions with the manager." "We know what you do every night with the manager at this place," the woman said. I remained silent when they confronted me about my adultery with my boss. When I could not deny their accusations, they insulted me with very bad words. That's also why I couldn't defend myself. The woman asked me to leave the restaurant before she called the police and sent me behind the poles. I begged them to let me stay until the morning. The woman grabbed my hand and started pulling me towards the door. "Go to the streets or to the house of the manager who has sex with you without an Islamic marriage. If you come near this restaurant again, we will hand you over to the police like a dirty whore," the woman continued as she pulled me to the door. She spat on my face and then slapped me on the cheek before pushing me out of the restaurant. Her old husband also kicked me in my buttocks with his shoe until I fell upside down. It was very late at night when I was kicked out of my temporary shelter. Once again, I was faced with the harsh reality of my dire situation. I foolishly believed that by letting these 2 selfish men, the police officer and the restaurant manager, get what they wanted from my body, my problem would be solved. It turns out that I had only surrendered what I cherished as a very precious honor, which was my chastity and dignity, but caught the wind in return. The same thing will happen to me every time I look for help from the wrong people. It was a very cold winter night. I didn't have any money. I left my bag and purse inside the restaurant. I was afraid to return to the angry man and woman. I guess that one of the workers informed the restaurant owners about my illicit relationship with the manager. I can't blame them or the workers. The manager stayed behind every night when everyone left. It wasn't hard for them to guess what we were doing every night. Maybe the manager bragged openly about his sexual relations with him. No Egyptian girl of my age and marital status would agree to work as a waitress in a male-only restaurant and sleep there at night. I didn't know where to go at such a late hour at night. The restaurant is located in the middle of the main market. I knew I would encounter police officers sooner or later. I crossed the road and entered a dark corner and decided to sleep there while I was alone like a stray dog. I looked for a place to hide to protect me from the cold and the police. It was a narrow, dark, and dirty corridor where I took refuge. I found a small piece of old wood and sat on it. I was shivering and shaking from the cold. My teeth were making a noise as they chattered. I thought I might freeze to death if I didn't get a blanket or a room to sleep in. While I was thinking about what to do about the extreme cold, I felt footsteps approaching me. I raised my head and looked up. I saw 2 policemen approaching me. My first reaction was to get up and run away from them before they caught me. But they were too close for me to escape from them. I managed to get back on my feet. "What are you doing here, you stray young woman?" someone asked in a hoarse voice. "Nothing, sir," I said with cold, trembling lips. "I'm waiting for someone. Someone to pick you up to fuck your pussy in the back seat of his car, right? I'm not a bad girl, sir. Why are you wandering around the market this late at night?" Before answering, the other policeman asked me, "How did you get here?" "I came by bus. No bus comes here at this time of night. The last bus came and left 2 hours ago. I've been waiting for another bus ever since, sir." "Where's your house?" "I got into a fight with my father and ran away." "Where are your parents?" "My father wanted to murder me in an honor killing, so I ran from him for my life." "What did you do for your father to slaughter you for honor?" "He accused me of having a love affair with my neighbor." "Then come with us. We have a nice hotel for you to spend the rest of the night there." "Thank you, sir. I don't want to go to any hotel." "You have no choice. You have to come with us to the prison because you are now under arrest." When the policeman said those words, he approached me and tried to grab my hand. "Don't touch me, sir. If you put your hand on me, I will scream and call people. Come with us before we use force." I said I will not go with you, and if you touch me again, I will scream and tell people that even though you are policemen, you want to gang rape me. My threat forced the policeman to withdraw his hand. Yet he kept looking at me as if I was a dangerous criminal threatening to kill him if he approached me. "Hey, Policeman Hassan, please call the police officer, Miss Miriam," the same officer said while still looking at me with fear as if I were pulling a gun in his face. The other cop used his radio and spoke to someone. In less than 10 minutes, a huge policewoman arrived in her Jeep. She was the same policewoman who arrested me the night before. "This is the same prostitute I caught before," the officer said as she jumped out of her car. "I think this homeless girl doesn't know how to run this prostitution business. No street-smart bitch would get arrested twice in less than a month." "Please, ma'am, don't call me a street prostitute. I come from an honorable family." "Then what are you? Are you the angel of the night fancy or a fairy Genia who came out of the Nile River?" "I have a problem with my father, ma'am." "What kind of problem do you have? Lack of sleep or enjoying the cold weather on the streets at night?" "I ran away from home." "You have to tell the court judge about your family problem and try to convince him that you are a street girl who is homeless at night and has no shelter, and yet you are not a perverted young woman or a prostitute." Chapter 17. On that cold winter night, I was arrested again and thrown behind bars. Prison was better for me than freezing from the bitter cold and dying like a homeless foundling child. I appeared before the same judge who tried me the first time. This time he became incredibly angry with me. He sentenced me to 3 months in prison with a final warning. He told me that if I was brought before his court again, he would imprison me for many years. While I was serving my sentence in prison, I discovered that something terrible had happened to me. I discovered that I was pregnant with an illegitimate child for the third time. Either the police officer or the restaurant manager impregnated me. I didn't know what to do with my pregnancy. I let my life continue inside prison without any direction or plan. However, in the last month of my imprisonment, I met a beautiful young girl who changed the course of my life forever. She was also an Arab girl. She was arrested for fighting and fatally beating another girl. She broke her hand while blinding the other girl's eye. At first, I was afraid of her, so I avoided her friendship. After a few days, I started to love her. She is very kind and loving, and her good personality reminded me of Nadia, Monir's sister, Amira's fiancée. "What is your crime?" she asked me while smiling. "I was arrested twice for wandering the streets at night." "Why don't you have a specific place and work there?" Before I could understand or respond to her question, she continued, "This way, you will make more money. Moreover, on the streets, if you run away from the police, you will be raped and robbed by a crook or other criminal." But I'm not a bad girl. I wanted to explain the misunderstanding to her, but she ignored me and continued talking. "I knew a girl who was raped, robbed, and killed in the street at night. But I'm not a whore," I shouted angrily at her. "Then why were you wandering the streets at night?" she asked me as a challenge. "I had no shelter because I ran away from home. This is how I started my life as a homeless girl. I ran away from my parents because they wanted to murder me in an honor killing. At first, I tried to live a good life and find honest work. The first problem I faced was shelter. The second problem was I didn't have the money. I went from house to house like a beggar. Everywhere I went, men tried to rape me and women threw me on the streets. No one believed that I was an innocent girl. I worked in the market, but every employer wanted me to provide him with sexual services in exchange for hiring me. Although at times, my circumstances forced me to satisfy my employers sexually, none of them could solve my problem. They used my body for sexual pleasure and to try to satisfy their insatiable lusts that even the fires of hell cannot satisfy. One day I was sleeping in a hotel or hostel for homeless women, and the next day inside a restaurant or store. Every now and then I get thrown out and sent back to the streets where I came from. I sat and listened to the story of that girl who was my fellow prisoner as if I were listening to myself. I felt as if she was reading my thoughts, recounting my memories, and telling them to me. When she finished telling her sad story, I said to her in a low voice, "This is exactly what has happened to me so far." She said very seriously, "I believe in you, Ikram, so listen to my advice and don't try to deceive yourself anymore. You can't live as an honest girl like you were before. Trust me, dear, you will not be able to return to society. You can't change your past, but you can control your present." "But I don't want to be a whore," I said to her as I read her thoughts before speaking about them. Who among us wanted to be a whore? All of us whores were forced into this. We are the victims of our cruel Islamic society, which places the honor of the family between the two legs of a woman. But I can't imagine myself having sex with 10 men in one day. You're just repeating the same words I used to say before I became a whore. I would rather die than become a bitch. You can overcome the remorse of your conscience and the torment of your emotions. Just 1 cup of alcohol every day will solve your problem. Drinking alcohol. This is the only thing an Arab girl will not do. This is what I thought before, but if you want to get into this business, only drinking alcoholic beverages can help you. When a Muslim girl drinks alcohol, she will do anything. Anything like what? You mean having sex. Sex is one of the other ugly things that a drunk Arab girl may do. She also sells alcohol and drugs and smokes cigarettes. So, what? Every man in this country smokes cigarettes, drinks alcohol, and goes to whorehouses. Who condemns or punishes him? No one, said I sadly. Friend and relative. Then why would it be wrong for a girl to do it? But he's a man. He will not bring shame to his family. Who does an adulterous man commit adultery with? Of course, with an adulterous girl like him. But the adulterous girl is a bad and fallen woman. Who made her a bad girl and a fallen woman from society? She waited for me to respond to her challenge. I just stared at her and waited for her next comment. Believe me, Ikram, before God, the adulterer and the adulteress are equal in sin. The Holy Quran said the adulteress and the adulterer, flog each of them with 100 lashes, and let no compassion take you for them in the religion of God if you believe in God and His day. And let a group of believers witness their torment. Surah An-Nur 25, verse 2. But the Islamic community holds the girl responsible because she represents the honor of the family. You know, my friend Ikram, our neighbor's son deceived me with his false love. He raped me in his room when there was no one in the house except the two of us and God alone. So, he impregnated me against my will, and I became pregnant with an illegitimate baby. Everyone in the neighborhood where I lived knew that he was the one who raped me and impregnated me. However, I was the only one who was blamed. He denied everything when he was questioned by some of our neighbors. My family wanted to kill me when they found out that I was pregnant with an illegitimate child out of the Islamic marriage bond. So, I had to run for my life. My rapist stayed at home and married another girl. I brought shame to my family, but not him. Is this justice? But we cannot change society. We can't change our past either. But we, the girls who are victims fleeing honor killings, can change our present. Anyway, I got out of prison after 3 months with another burden. I was carrying in my womb an illegitimate child of unknown parentage. I didn't know who his or her father was. How do I know that the child inside me belongs to the evil police officer or the lustful restaurant manager? Even if I knew who the biological father of my child was, I would not be able to convince his father to take care of me until I gave birth to his child. I could not abort the fetus because abortion is a crime punishable by law in Egypt. If I go to any doctor or midwife, they will report me to the police. Despite this, I went to an Egyptian female doctor's clinic and she expelled me. She told me that if I returned to her, she would call the morality police officers and hand me over to them. So, I had no choice but to carry the burden of my pregnancy until the time I gave birth. When and where I was going to give birth to my third illegitimate baby, I had no idea. I had to live with my fetus until one day somewhere I could give birth to it. It may have been born in the street or in prison. I may also die before giving birth to my third haram child, whom I conceived illegally. Nothing in my life was certain. While I was in prison, I received advice from 2 women. One of them was my Arab friend who advised me to start this so-called prostitution business. She gave me an address and a letter to a pimp lady who she thought would help me. She told me not to mention anything to her about my illegal pregnancy. The second piece of advice came to me from an elderly African woman who was imprisoned with me. She said that she knew of a factory that employed women and provided them with housing. She also told me that the workload is heavy. I decided to try working in a factory first. I still had a glimmer of hope that I would find decent, honorable work and shelter. When I was released, I had no money to travel by bus from the prison gate to the factory. I covered the distance on foot. It was a very hot and sunny day. It took me 3 hours to get to the factory. As I walked, I took shelter several times under the shade of trees and the walls of houses. I was sweating terribly. When I arrived at the factory office, I was so exhausted. The head of the factory was a woman. She hired me the same day. She advised me to be wary of my male coworkers. So, she believed they might try to rape me. She knew that my age and beauty would attract their attention. She told me that most of the women were middle-aged and none of them were Arab. They were Zanuj or Negro women who came to Egypt from poor African countries. When she finished teaching me how to behave and be careful, she took me inside the factory and assigned me to work. The work I did that day was packing some products. It was very hard work. We worked while standing. Most of the women were strong. Most of them were refugee immigrants originally from African countries. The factory was divided into a section for men and a section for women. There was no fence or railing separating us from the men. We could see each other through the small space that separated us. None of the men were Arab either. They were all Zanuj blacks who came to Egypt from some poor African countries. They wanted to work in the Arab country of Egypt so that they could find a way to be smuggled by human traffickers across the Mediterranean Sea to the shores of Europe. They all kept staring at me because I was the only white Arab girl among the black African women. I was too afraid to look at their faces. I felt their lustful eyes burning my skin like sunlight. We worked until 6 in the evening. I was lucky enough to fill a half shift on my first day. When work ended, the supervisor asked me to follow the women to the dormitory. It was a small space set up in an old section of the factory. The factory provided only pillows and blankets. The men occupied the other half of the dormitory. We are separated from them by a zinc wall. We could hear their voices coming through the zinc barrier. That barrier, even if a dog jumped through it, could break it and attack us. The African men spoke different languages. African women were also engaged in speaking their mother tongue. I felt like an Indian foreigner in that crowded residential area. I only know Arabic and none of them spoke the language I know. A few of them, such as the Sudanese and Mauritanian women, spoke broken Arabic, which was difficult for me to understand. I was afraid to be alone anywhere in the factory, even for a minute. I was very tired and exhausted from the hard work and long standing on my feet. I didn't bother eating dinner. I was satisfied with the small snack I had during the break. Every organ in my body was in pain from the severe pain that I felt in every organ of my body. As soon as I placed my exhausted body on the hardwood floor, I fell asleep. I used the pillow and blanket as bedding because we didn't have beds to sleep on. The blanket was full of lice and ticks, but I was so numb that the bites of those blood-sucking night bugs did not prevent me from sleeping. The mosquitoes were in the millions, but the blanket served as a night mosquito net for me. I don't remember what woke me up in the middle of the night. I thought I heard some sound of someone moving in the dark tunnel-like mass grave. I was too terrified to look for the source of the noise. I convinced myself that I had dreamed the sound happen. All the African women were asleep. Some of them were snoring through their flat noses as if they were dogs howling in the dark middle of the night. I could also hear from a close distance the howling of foxes and hyenas and the barking of stray dogs. My heart was becoming filled with panic. I was shaking, sweating, and breathing hard due to lack of ventilation and taking a lot of bad breaths. The dormitory was as dark as the mass grave in which men and women were buried alive. The women's ward in the prison was 1,000 times better than that dark cave. I couldn't see anything around me. I tried to close my eyes and sleep, but I couldn't. I felt a strong urge to go to the toilet to urinate. I resisted the idea of venturing out on my own at such a late hour in the dark night. But the desire was so strong that I felt like I might pee inside my underwear. I hoped that one of the women would wake up herself so I could ask her to accompany me to the toilet. I was afraid that any tired woman would get angry if I woke her up and asked for her help. Not knowing her language may make communicating with her more difficult. I struggled for a while with the urgent need to urinate. When I couldn't hold my urine any longer, I decided to take a risk. I knew the women's restroom was on the other side of the factory. It was connected to the men's restroom. The two toilets were separated only by a short wall made of cardboard. Any man can jump over that wall and attack any woman who dares to come there at night. I didn't need to cross the men's dormitory to get to it. It was on the other side, opposite the women's dormitory. I was carefully holding my breath. I didn't want to make any sound to alert the others sleeping in the cave about my movement. The toilet was dark outside. I was afraid to turn on the lights. I knew that if any man saw me going to the toilet, he might come after me. He would rape me like a dog preys sexually on its female dog in the open. I rushed to the women's toilet and decided to quickly urinate and get out. When I reached it, I hesitated to enter. The light was off inside too. I was afraid I would trip over something and fall and hurt my face. I quickly turned on the light and turned it off. I saw my way inside the small toilet. I went in and in a short time, I urinated and came out. Half of the urine dripped onto the floor and the other half into the urinal. I was very relieved when no one hurt me while I was inside. Once I got out, I decided to go back to the dormitory. Instead, I bumped into a black figure who met me like a ghost outside the toilet. I was paralyzed and couldn't scream. I thought I had bumped into a ghost, goblin, or demon. The black monster hit me like an electric shock. It took me a few minutes to get over my panic. By then, he closed my mouth with one hand, and his other hand wrapped around my body. He held me tightly to his body as if he wanted to break my bones while I was alive. I couldn't resist or scream for help. He was a big, strong Negro man, like a Roman gladiator who pounced on a stray deer. He forced me to the ground while his hands grabbed my body and closed my mouth. With unspeakable force, he started raping me. He tore all my clothes, including my little swimsuit-like underwear and my bra. His nails scratched my tender flesh like the claws of a hawk that pounced on a small bird. I struggled under his heavy weight. His hand was covering my mouth securely. I suffocated and crushed under his huge body as if I were a child who had fallen helpless prey to a crocodile. While he was raping me violently, I felt his huge penis inserted into my pussy like a kazuk-thick stick that jams into the anus and emerges forcefully on the other side of the mouth. I lost consciousness and became like a lifeless corpse lying outside the women's toilet all night. I didn't know what happened to me after that. I remained in a comatose state in the hospital for several days. I could not open my eyes and come out of my long coma that lasted for a week. Through the hospital's staff of doctors and nurses, I was told that I had been brutally raped and severely beaten by one of my male colleagues at the workplace. Some of the female Negro workers from the factory visited me in the hospital. I learned from them that an African woman found my unconscious body near the women's toilet early in the morning. She screamed and woke up all the other workers. They all came there and surrounded my unconscious body. None of them dared to touch my lifeless body. My clothes were torn, my body was naked, and blood was still pouring from my genitals. The factory management immediately called the police. It took more than 2 hours for police officers to arrive at the crime scene. The factory is located on the outskirts of Cairo City. All that time my body remained lying there. There was no doctor or nurse at the factory to give me first aid. Most of the women concluded that I had been raped and murdered at night. The African workers thought that the beautiful Egyptian girl had been kidnapped from the women's dormitory while everyone was sleeping. While my health was recovering in the hospital's women's ward from the blatant attack and violent rape, I remembered what my Arab friend, who was an inmate in prison, had said to me when we were in prison. So, listen to my advice, my dear, and don't try to deceive yourself any longer. Believe me, Ikram, you will not be able to return to society and find your status and respect as you had it before you escaped from honor killing at the hands of your angry husband, who framed you with the blackmailer while he was hugging you, kissing your lips, and squeezing your bare breasts in his house. You cannot change your painful past, but you can control your present. Her words were a prophecy that needed to happen in my life, and I was destined to fulfill it. The Egyptian girl Ikram Silla, who was subjected to horrific abuse, tried to speak more while telling her tragic story to her friend Hafez Amin, but her words were interrupted by the heartbreaking pain. She burst into tears because she knew then that she had lost the most precious thing in her life, which was her honor. Her lover hugged her tightly. His tender touches made her bury her head in his chest and continue crying. Her boyfriend started crying loudly as well. The two friends cried like a couple who lost their 2 children, who were the livers of their bodies walking on the ground. Chapter 18. After getting extremely drunk the next day, Ikram resumed telling her tragic story. Hafez was also forced, due to the sad story of his beloved girlfriend, to drink alcohol beyond his usual limits. The 2 lovers went to bed very late the night before. When they woke up in the late afternoon, they started their day by drinking the Abyssinian Anisha whiskey. They drank strong liquor and smoked cigarettes in silence. Hafez did not want his beautiful friend Ikram to rush into telling the rest of her sad story. He felt that she had lived the most painful and abusive life any Egyptian girl could ever live. He began to hate every evil, guilty man who contributed to her tragedy. He bitterly hates her husband, Al-Taib Saleh, the witch doctor Faki Mahmoud, the evil police officer, the manager of the lustful restaurant, and the other men who raped her and devoured her body like rabid dogs when she became a prostitute and an addict to alcohol. He even hates her former friend, Navila, and her neighbor, Taiba, who took her to the evil rapist, quack, witch doctor, Faki Mahmoud. He wished to lay his hands on them and kill them one by one. None of these evil men and women deserved to live. He even began to hate her infidel Christian lover, Gabriel Gerges. If he had been a true and honest friend, he would have convinced her to leave her Muslim husband and run away with him. They had to flee outside the Islamic world, cross the Mediterranean Sea, go to Europe, and then live in cohabitation without marriage because Islam does not allow a Muslim woman to marry an infidel man. Unfortunately, her Christian lover only enjoyed her beauty and sexy body and disappeared from her life. He must now have married an infidel, uncircumcised Christian girl like him, and they had sons and daughters. Ikram was able to read the agitating thoughts and boiling righteous wrath in the eyes of her saving angel, Hafez Amin. She looked at his face for a while before saying thoughtfully, "But I do not blame any of these people who tortured and abused me. The real culprit and criminal who must be condemned in the strongest terms is our Islamic society. Our oppressive Arabic society, which derives its rules and laws from Islam, is the one that gave men an indisputable and unchallengeable authority to enslave women and mistreat them. We live in a society where misogynistic laws are created to protect men and mistreat women. As a woman, I discovered that I live in a land where the laws are not fair to me." "Yes, my sweetie Ikram, you are absolutely right. Yes, my dear Hafez, our Islamic religious laws have held me responsible for my illegal pregnancy, which was the result of coercion rather than consensual sex. I was left alone to struggle with my shame. For 9 months, I carried the fetus inside me as if I was a pregnant whore with a scandal for everyone to see. Everyone saw me carrying the illegitimate child in my big belly and condemned me as a fallen woman. None of them showed mercy or tried to listen to my story and find out if I had committed adultery willingly for money as a street hooker or was forced to do so. When I got out of the hospital, I went to the police officer who I accused of taking advantage of my helpless situation and raping me. At first, he showed interest in me and apologized for slapping me in the face when he was drunk. He told me he was trying to contact me after I spoke to him on the phone. I told him I had been locked in prison all this time. I did not tell him about my adultery with the restaurant manager. Then I told him that I became pregnant by him. "I can't be your child's father," he said anxiously. I lied to him and said, "No one touched me except you." "You have to be kidding me, Ikram. I cannot have a child. I don't have a baby yet. I have been married to my wife Sakina for 7 years now. All the sexologist doctors said the problem was with me and not with my young wife. So how did I get pregnant by you? You are lying to me. I'm sure you had other men besides me. When I had sex with you for the first time, I did not find that you were a virgin girl, but rather your pussy was already open, which means that its hymen had been broken by another man's penis. Yes, I was a married woman and I ran away from my husband when he tried to kill me in an honor killing. But I did not get pregnant by him because I had a barren husband. I am also a barren husband, and I can give you the addresses and names of the sexologist physicians who knew that I could not have children. At least help me until I deliver my baby. I don't have the money to help you. My brother got married a week ago, and I spent a lot of money on his wedding. In addition, my father recently died, and I spent the rest of my money on his funeral. Believe me, Ikram, I borrowed my salary in advance for 2 months. But sir, I am a lonely and homeless pregnant girl and I have no money or shelter. What should I do or where should I go? God is gracious. Trust in His mercy and repent sincerely, and He will find a solution for you to solve the problem of your illegal pregnancy until you deliver the illegitimate baby from your stomach. Why didn't you talk about God and His mercy when I first came to you? At that time, I had money to help you stay in a hotel, but not now. You didn't help me back then. You took advantage of me, deceived me, committed adultery with me, or rather raped me, made me pregnant, and impregnated me with your illegitimate baby. You are a criminal policeman and a selfish man, and you took advantage of your position as a lawman to abuse a helpless girl like me whom you were supposed to protect from criminals instead of sexually preying on her. Listen to me, oh you fallen woman, you bitch Ikram. I'm being nice to you so far. Don't let me use the law against you. The law should condemn evil fraudsters like you. I think a bad and worthless girl like you deserves to be in prison for the rest of her life. So, if you don't get out of my office, I will send you straight behind bars. Then the wicked police officer threatened me with issuing an arrest warrant against me if I did not leave front of his face and never return to his office again. I was not afraid of his threats, but I remembered the warnings of the criminal court judge who threatened to imprison me for many years if I appeared in his court a third time. When the cowardly police officer kicked me out of his office, I went to the restaurant to look for the other man who had committed adultery and betrayed me. I was told that he was fired a long time ago for repeatedly committing adultery with me inside the restaurant at night. I got his home address from the new manager. I went straight to his residence. I was greeted by his wife, a fat woman like an elephant. So, I understood that he was married and had 3 children, but he lied to me that he was a single man and not married yet. I learned from his obese wife that he is out of the house because he is still at work. His wife was not happy to see me. I told her that I worked with her husband when he was a restaurant manager. She asked me to come another day if I had something important to discuss with her man. I told her that I lived very far away, so I couldn't come back again. She reluctantly took me inside her house. I did not know what her husband would say when he saw me in his house with his wife and children. Regardless of what he would say, I decided to confront the bad man who committed adultery with me about my illegal pregnancy. When he came home, he was surprised to see me sitting in his living room. I saw that he started sweating and shaking before I could talk to him. His wife guessed that I had a hidden business, such as drug trafficking or a secret sexual relationship with her husband. She was the one who confronted him first. "Why did you become afraid when you saw this girl?" his fat wife asked him, her mouth foaming like a camel. "No, my lady, I am not afraid to see her, but I was surprised to find her in my house. She is the girl who made me lose my previous lucrative job at Sheikh Al-Zagbi restaurant. The restaurant owners, falsely and without evidence, accused me of having a love affair with her. She was homeless and had no housing, so I allowed her to sleep at night inside the restaurant. But unfortunately, she was a street prostitute and brought some clients to commit adultery with her at night inside the restaurant in exchange for money. I think, my good lady, you know about her problem, and I already told you why I was fired because of her shameful actions. The owners called me the next day and told me I was fired. They thought that I was committing adultery with her and sharing the illicit money she earned from fornication with the customers of the luxury restaurant. Yes, I know about her scandalous story, but why does this worthless street girl come to you in your house? Does she want to have sex with you in our backyard or inside the dirty toilet? You'd better ask her that question. I don't have any sexual relationship with her. I was kind to her and tried to help her once, and I lost my gainful job because of her bad behavior. When I saw him trying to justify himself through lying and putting the blame of his losing his work on me alone, I opened my mouth and told his wife what her unfaithful and adulterous man had done to me. Your husband didn't try to help me. He deceived me by claiming to find permanent accommodation for me. He told me he is a bachelor and not married yet. He committed adultery with me several times inside the restaurant at night and made me pregnant with his illegitimate child. And now I carry his haram baby in my womb. The obese wife didn't believe my words and shouted at me, "You're a liar." I know and trust my dear husband. He would never go for a useless street bitch like you. Why should he go for the milk of a street goat when he has a milky cow to fuck for free in his house? The lying husband said to me angrily, "Get out of my house before I kick you with my shoe up your dirty ass." His obese wife did not wait for him to hit me on my butt with his shoe and expel me. She grabbed my hand, took me out of her house like an animal, and pushed me into the street. Because of the size of her body and the thickness of her hands, her violent push made me fall upside down, and my private parts such as my thighs, hips, and legs were exposed. And even my underwear became visible to the neighbors and people passing by who gathered around my fallen body outside the doorstep of the house.